This is Community Forum, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. Early childhood is one of the most crucial periods for development, and now early childhood education is in the national conversation. What can communities, schools, and families do to play a more active role in this arena? Dr. Teri Talan from National Louis University is here to talk about that and related issues. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And I'm glad to have you. This is one of my areas of concern. I have young nieces, but I'm also an educator. I love education. And I'm always curious about what draws people to this field of work.
Well, I think early childhood education draws people who really understand how young children are just developing so quickly. Their brains are developing at an enormous pace in those early years, and to see the joy, the absolute joy children have as they're exploring their environment and learning new things is so rewarding. Oftentimes, unfortunately, children lose a lot of that joy of learning later on in their school careers, but those who work with young children are rewarded every day by that experience of seeing firsthand the learning and the pleasure and the growth that happens in those early years. So,
okay, so what drew you is seeing that. What path led you to education? Tell us about that.
Well, I kind of came to it through the back door.
Okay.
In my first career, I was an attorney, a child advocate attorney, and I worked with the juvenile court and the juvenile justice system. And I got kind of tired of working with children and families that were really suffering a lot of dysfunction. And so after taking a brief break to have my own children, I decided I wanted to work at the other end of the continuum and move into working to solidify healthy families and healthy development for children, and went into administering an early childhood program in my community.
And what did that experience teach you?
Well, it taught me, first thing it taught me was that I had a lot of hubris in thinking I could do this work without having an education in early childhood education myself. So the first thing I did was well, maybe not quite the first thing, but I quickly learned that I needed to go back to school, that having a bachelor's degree and even a law degree didn't prepare me. Just because children are little doesn't mean there isn't a serious body of knowledge about how to help children grow and develop most effectively. So I went and got a master's at National Louis University, and I got more and more involved in the policy and advocacy end of early childhood education. I was very frustrated that there wasn't as much attention to how important this developmental stage is.
Right.
And I got involved with the McCormick Center for Early Childhood Leadership, where I'm now employed full-time at National Louis University, and then made my third switch to working as an adult educator, working to help prepare other leaders in early childhood to have the capacity to do the very best they can for young children and their families.
Wow, so it's a very, I guess, long and winding road. But it sounds rewarding, and you said that it was a humbling experience to go back and actually work that directly. I'm sure many parents and educators find the experience of having a young child humbling as well. And you said it's one of the periods of rapid development, rapid growth, and that's obvious in the growth of the child. Can you take us through some of those stages and what signs we should be looking for, or what kind of work we should be doing with children at that early stage of 0 to 5?
Well, I mean, we don't have enough time for that in this
brief
program. But what I think is really important is to understand that it's old thinking to think that education begins at kindergarten, and that children are learning at this very beginning of life, even in utero. So,
wow.
I mean, the research has shown that there are 700 neural connections being made every second in the first few years of life. So children, if we're conscious of that learning and developing taking place, what kinds of environments do we need? We need environments that are loving and nurturing and consistent. We also need an intentional attempt to increase language and problem solving as children grow. So early education really begins with families and communities, as well as with schools and early childhood programs.
Okay, and you said nurturing, problem solving, language development.
Emotional regulation is a really important piece of what young children need to learn. So oftentimes when people think learning, they think just academic learning.
Right.
And that's going to happen later. You know, you're going to learn the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? But learning is so much more than that. And in the early years, children are learning how to be social in an appropriate way, how to control their emotions, how to explore their environment, how to connect with people and materials, as well as language, which is such a critical piece of children's early development. So I would like to say that the humbling part was thinking that I could be an administrator of an early childhood program without knowing the body of knowledge and understanding how important it is. And today still, I mean, we're going back a number of years, I'm not going to tell you how long, but I mean, even today, it's amazing how we wouldn't accept a principal in a school to not have an education and, you know, as an educator.
Right.
And principals of schools need to have a graduate degree. They need to have not only an education background, but a background in administration and program administration. But when you look at the leaders of early childhood programs, there's very, very little required of them. And in fact, by licensing, it's only about 2 years of college in anything and about 18 semester hours, or the equivalent of maybe 5 or 6 courses in early childhood education. So it's in Illinois, I'm talking.
In Illinois.
So there's just not a level playing field when it comes to what administrators bring to leading early childhood programs. So my passion right now, working at McCormick Center, is really making sure that leaders, whether they're working in schools, whether they're working in Head Start programs or community-based childcare programs, have that body of knowledge that can really help the families and the children get the most out of those early years and early learning experiences.
Okay, it's interesting you mentioned that there aren't the same requirements for a principal at a school or somebody working directly as an administrator for these children in their early learning years. Why do you think that disparity exists? And but we have seen there is some change, as we saw President Obama speaking this past spring about making a national preschool program. So there is some change, but there's still this disparity.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, I think that the younger the child, the less respect goes to the professionals working with them. And traditionally, historically, working with young children was women's work and was undervalued. I think that we could start there and look at why there isn't a greater concern for the professionalism of the teachers as well as the leaders. So now we're going to talk about the president's proposal, which is a great proposal. Fabulous that we're getting public recognition of how important early education is. But again, the emphasis in that proposal is about having well-qualified teachers. There's nothing about well-qualified administrators. And this is a problem because even though principals may have a good education, they may not know about the early years, about child development, about the learning continuum from birth on. So principals need additional professional development. Directors of Head Start and childcare programs, they need the support to be leaders as well as instructional leaders. So there's a lot of work, and I've shared that message with the administration, and This is part of what I think is, people don't realize there's this discrepancy between the settings where children are.
Right.
And so even parents, when parents go and look at an early childhood program, they need to be looking for things that aren't necessarily the most evident. It is less important whether the toys are new and fancy. What really matters are what's going on in terms of the learning that's the child has experienced. What kinds of relationships, what kind of a learning environment is it? And so I'd want parents to be looking to question, what are the qualifications of the teachers? What's the qualifications of the administrator?
Okay.
And how does that administrator support teachers to be able to do the best job they can with the children?
Now, what signs or what evidence can parents look for when they go to a preschool or a kindergarten classroom, and they're talking with the teacher, or they're thinking about sending their child to some school? What kind of questions can they ask?
Well, I think they need to be asked questions about the qualifications. They need to observe
experience.
degrees and experience. And in terms of the early childhood programs, there are external criteria that a parent could ask about that essentially lets them know that there's external review that means this program is meeting high standards. I'm amazed, even one of my colleagues at the university was looking to enroll her baby in a child care program and said, well, it's licensed, so I know it's a good program. Well, licensing is minimal health and safety. It's not about early learning. Mm-hmm. So you need to go deeper than a licensed program. What you're looking for is a program that's a Head Start program that meets standards, a program that's been participating in our state's quality rating and improvement system and has achieved recognition of having quality beyond the licensing quality, programs that are Preschool for All, which is our state-funded early learning programs. Then you know that there's measures and outside observers who are making sure that the program meets certain criteria of quality. It's hard for families to know what to look for. But either you ask deep questions,
right,
but you have to feel empowered to do that, and that's not easy for some families. Or you look for these external measures. Also, national accreditation is another measure that shows the program is of high quality.
And are there a lot of institutions in Chicago and Illinois that are nationally accredited?
Right. There are. Right. There are, and I just want to share with you that Illinois is one of 14 states that has received what's called the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. A significant amount of money from the federal government, something like $51 million, has come to Illinois to really increase access to high quality early learning for the most vulnerable children in our state. And so there is an enormous effort right now to reach out to families, to help programs improve their quality, to help bridge for families access to programs of high quality. So right now is an exciting time for families with young children in Illinois. And our new quality rating and improvement system is called Accelerate Illinois. And so families should be looking for programs that are participating at some of the higher levels of quality as monitored and measured by the Accelerate QRIS in Illinois.
What's QA?
QRIS stands for Quality Rating and Improvement Systems.
Okay.
So our center, McCormick Center, is very involved in this early learning challenge. Our staff, many of them are involved in monitoring quality using reliable assessment tools to help guide improvement efforts for programs. So continuous quality improvement is the mantra of everyone at our center, everyone at the state level that's involved with the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge. Continuous quality improvement is what it's all about.
Okay, it's very exciting. But like you said a little earlier, a lot of times parents don't feel empowered.
Right.
They may be working long hours. They don't necessarily have a background in education,
Right.
although they have a deep love for their child or their children. How are you mentioned also the word bridges?
Right.
How are those bridges being built to bring in those families with the greatest need and probably the least amount of resources?
Right.
What's happening to create that dynamic?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head, because even though we're reaching a lot of children in poverty, we're not reaching all the children in poverty by a long shot. Interestingly, the Latino population is the group that it has the largest number of preschool age children that do not attend a preschool or a early learning experience prior to kindergarten. So of any ethnic or racial grouping, Hispanic children, I believe we're at about close to 2/3 of Hispanic children do not attend preschool before.
That's a huge number.
It's huge. And nationally, we're looking at 50%. So even that's bad. But Latino children are in Illinois, the data is showing, are starting kindergarten 6 months to 8 months behind their peers. So if there's a gap when you start kindergarten, even really excellent education that helps children grow from where they are does not close the gap. If we're really wanting to close the gap, it's got to start in those years before the child starts in kindergarten. Early learning programs are the way to do it. And you asked about those bridges. Well, there are community organizations. A part of Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge is really designed to put money into reaching out to help families access those services in many different ways. So I would say in Chicago, we probably have more resources than in other parts of the state to do that work. But I'd say that we can do better, and we're investing some of those dollars into doing that work.
These bridges, we're finding them through schools and nonprofits, through government institutions. How are we
doing it?
Yeah.
It's really a mixture of all of those.
Okay.
Schools are reaching out to families. Community groups, there's an organization called Kofi, I think is how you pronounce it, that goes door to door, talks to families to get them information. Sometimes it involves, there's a project that's part of Illinois Action for Children that's called Community Connections, so that's right here in Chicago, that is really helping families who have difficulty getting to early learning settings. Unfortunately, regulated high-quality programs aren't necessarily where the most needy children are. So some of those issues of access are about transportation. Some is about knowledge, and about really understanding how important it is to make that effort to get that child to a program such as Head Start or a Preschool for All program sponsored through the Illinois State Board of Education, or CPS.
So for these needy families, sometimes it's just the practical question of getting there.
Right.
Is there busing, or
Yeah.
has that been part of the?
Well, that's a very tough situation because busing is so expensive.
Right.
But there are projects that are really making that effort to provide busing to connect not just children who are at home and can't get to a program, but sometimes families are working 2 shifts and have unusual non-traditional working hours. So they may be with a relative or a friend who's caring for young children, and they need transportation from another source of care other than the family. And those efforts are being made in the city of Chicago and beginning across the state.
Well, that's good to hear. I want to return to the question of the Latino community and these challenges that it's facing in early childhood education. What are some of the reasons for this low participation? I think you mentioned some of them as far as odd working hours or
Right,
double.
that's a big piece of it.
Right, and being cared for by an adult relative that may not be able to get around so easily. What are some of the other challenges in this area that Latinos are facing, and what are organizations doing to help overcome that?
Well, I think that even culturally, I think that there's a desire to keep children at young age in a home-like setting. And there are many family child care providers that are licensed providers that are really delivering high quality learning experiences. So I don't want to make it seem that one can only do that in a school or Head Start. Family child care is a very important part of our infrastructure of arrangements for children. But I would urge families to question again, is this a licensed program? Is this family child care home provider participating in the QRIS? Because they too can participate. So it's about asking the right questions and knowing that it's important. I think that the biggest hurdle is helping families know that school isn't starting at 5, or education. School may start at 5,
Right.
but education starts earlier, and where children are during their day really does matter in terms of helping close that gap that will start kindergarten on an even playing field.
Right, and which is, like you said, it's even if it's there are programs that exist to help children catch up, the effect is essentially it's not the same.
Correct.
Children, I guess, they hit age 5 and they're at a different stage of development.
Right.
Right.
That's exactly right. And then they're playing catch up. And if you're playing catch up, then what are you missing out on, at the same time?
Right.
So, and it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. So right now, I'd say that the time is right. We know what we need to do. We have an opportunity to really close that gap by bringing the most vulnerable children to the kinds of supportive learning environments that can really close the gap and help them be successful, not just in school, but what's important is economically.
Right.
The success of children in so many different levels is influenced by whether or not they have a high quality early learning experience in the preschool years. It's hard to believe, but that's what the research has shown, that has followed children into their 40s and found, I don't know exactly what the number is off the top of my head, but it's the earnings potential is huge. Even the success of marriages, the lack of, a decrease in rates of incarceration. So there's so many factors in addition to the financial, but even the social well-being of the individual. It's a lasting effect from those preschool years.
It's incredible that those first 5 years of life are so crucial. And you're saying in earnings, incarceration rates, even success in marriage. What can parents do practically? You've touched on some of the activities parents could do and the research they can do once they want to put their child in a program. What can they do at home with regards to language, emotional development, and those related areas?
Well, I think the thing that is so critical is talking to your child and reading to your child. And I'm going to tell you a story that when I had my own daughter, was preschool age, I had this experience where I was eating dinner with her at a fast food restaurant, and I'm sitting there and we're eating our dinner and we're talking, and next to us is a gentleman, an African-American gentleman with a preschool child, and they're eating their dinner and they're not talking, they're eating and just taking care of business of eating their dinner. And we finished about the same time. And this man said to me, "Do you always talk to your daughter like that?" And at first, I was sort of stunned, like, well, what does he mean? Was he being critical? What was going on?
Right.
And I realized it was foreign to him to hear us conversing constantly throughout our meal. And that just clicked for me about really understanding, which is how important talking to your child like you would talk to an adult, not about adult content,
Right.
but adult language is how you create the building blocks for learning and continuous language and literacy, and then reading to your child. So, I was lucky enough to be born into a culture which was talk, 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 talk.
Your family?
That was my family. I mean, it was like that was how I was raised. So I did the same with mine. But if that's not your heritage, if that's not how you were raised, you don't know that's important. So parents need to communicate with their children all the time, ask questions, find out, help the child grow with their language, and read and communicate a love of reading. So those would be the two things that I would say are most important for helping children develop into lifelong learners with good literacy skills, and love your children and hug them and
Right.
love them and look them in the eye and enjoy them, and that will go a long way to having children being set on the right path.
So those hugs, obviously you don't schedule them or anything,
Right.
but as far as reading, do you think it'd be recommendable for families to say, hey, we're going to schedule reading at this hour every night, or we're all going to read as a family together these picture books,
Right.
whatever it may be, this night. We're
Yeah.
going to turn off the television. Is that part of the problem?
Oh, absolutely. And I used to say this when I was the director of the child care center I ran. It's important to pick books that you enjoy reading. So part of what is happening there is the joy of reading gets communicated. Now, if you have parents that don't love reading, it's more difficult. So again, how do you help parents who find books that they enjoy reading? And here I say, let's use our resources of the libraries and help them find what can work for them. So you're communicating as a parent a love of reading and a habit of reading at the same time. So that's the message for parents, is don't just find books that you think are educational, find books that you enjoy reading to your child and that your child enjoys as well.
So maybe that release imagination, even if it's fantasy or
Right.
just fun, as long as you
Right.
enjoy it and you're doing it together.
Right,
It-
and help the child develop language in their home language,
Right.
and read to your child in your home language. Don't think you have to read to your child in English if that's not the first language. Language development is the critical piece, and it can be in the home language, English, but read to the child, read to your child. That's the message.
Thanks so much for coming out and sharing all of this information with us. Community Forum is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Community Forum for local issues and concerns every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.